Hey guys, this is Anthony here. As you may recall from the last video, what I wanted to cover in the next video is a device inventory. We want to take all of the various regex that we learned from the last video and we want to apply that to a more practical use case. So you're probably thinking, is the RE library what we're going to be using? And one of the things is that I've always learned with code is that if there's something that's already written out there, then why not use it? Instead of rewriting it like this. That should always be one of the most important and basic principles that you incorporate into all of your code. There's no need to reinvent the wheel if it's already out there. Now, technically, you could write your own if you find it to be an interesting learning project or learning process. But I'd say most of the time, if there is a library out there that does what you want to do, now maybe there's not a specific capability within that general module. In that case, you could always just write it yourself, expand on what's already there, and submit a pull request. But that's not really why we're here today. So you're probably wondering, what is it, if we're not using RE, what is it we're going to use to create a device inventory? Before I get into that, I kind of want to give some background into what it is we're going to do. So I have this folder here called inventory. Under there, I have the configs, the show commands that we're going to use from a couple of different example switches, switch stack specifically. And we're going to take this and we're going to parse out the data, and then we're going to put that data into a CSV file. And that way, you will have something you can leverage to essentially generate a device inventory. Now understand that this script is not going to actually connect to the devices. Now, if I wanted to connect to the devices and run the show command and get the show command output, the best way about going about that is, one, you could technically do NetMiko, but the thing about NetMiko is, unfortunately, with NetMiko, there is no concurrency built in. So because that is the case, what you want to do is instead, you want to probably use Nornir. NetMiko, you could actually write concurrency yourself, but it's really not the best way of going about it. Nornir already has that built in. Again, going back to the principle of, if it's already written, then leverage what's there where possible. Okay? So that is pretty much a overall introduction of what we're going to do. The output is going to be a CSV file, and that will be our intention. So the question is, how are we going to parse it? What library are we going to use? And this is my favorite library when it comes to basically taking a show output from a particular network device command, taking specific fields out of that show command, and then storing it in an output file. And that output file is going to have a YAML format to it. So I'm going to show you some of the examples that are already here, all of the templates that you can use, okay? So you'll see here there's templates for all different kinds of vendors. You have Arista support, you have Cisco IOS support, you have Brocade support, you have ASA support, NXOS, iOS XR, iOS XE, you have Juniper, you have Palo Alto, and you have VMware NSX. So the purpose of doing this is the template here. What the template does is, if you open one of these templates. Let's open the show version template. Okay. So if you go into the show version template, you will see a bunch of regex defined here. And, you know, if you were following along from the previous lesson to get some familiarity with all these different character expressions, then you're probably familiar with these. If you're not familiar with regex, you probably want to go back to either that lesson, or you can, you know, read on Google or online somewhere about what all these different regex patterns are, and then you will understand these better. The second thing here, which is new, which you did not see in the RE parsing video, is this value. So what the value is if you look here, this is our expression. Okay, so you always write start at the top, and then after you write start, for each line you have this caret here to signify the beginning of a new line, and then you have, you know, a certain expression in that new line, and within a certain position of that line, there's a variable that you're looking for, a value. Okay, and it looks like this. You're going to have a $sign, and then you're going to have these squiggly brackets around the value. And what's going to happen is, when you run this template on a particular text file or show command, it's going to pick out these different values, and it's going to store that in a structured format. So this is where all the parsing magic happens. We actually do not have, for this use case, we do not have to rewrite one. Now, technically, if you want to, we could write our own. This is a very flexible library, but you're probably curious, you know, kind of where the syntax of this comes from. So this is a parser called TextFSM. TextFSM was created by Google, and then NTC, they used and leveraged TextFSM, and they built out their own template parser. Okay. So, you know, here's an example that they give you of a VLAN output if you were to type in show VLAN, and this is an example of the JSON output that you will receive after you apply the template. So you'll see here we're defining a variable, okay, and then parse object is the method we're using to run our parser, okay, and we define a platform, Cisco IOS, we define the command, show VLAN, and then we define what is the data that we're going to be parsing. The data comes from up here, of course, and then you're probably wondering, how does it derive the platform and how does it derive the command? If you go back into the templates folder here, there's an index file, and with that index file, there's a line for each of the parsers, and you're gonna see here basically they define a set of various parser definitions here, and they have a unique name for each one. And then there's two fields here. You have the field for the platform, so this is where you're deriving the platform from for the definition, and then this is where you get the command from. Okay, and then after that, you're gonna go into the test folder, and the test folder is going to show you an example input and an example output. So within Cisco IOS and then show version folder, you're going to see a raw file being, in this case, a 4500 switch with the show version. And then after the data is processed through the parser, this is your output in a YAML format. Okay, so that is what we will be building. So now that I've covered that, what I want to do is we're going to start writing it out. So what we're going to do is we are going to go back to the main page, and within the main page, we're going to take this. I'm going to take the top import here, throw that in here, and actually put that on the first line. And then take this, and we're going to call this inventory parsed equals parsed out, parse output, platform is Cisco iOS, command is show version, data, we're going to, we are actually, we'll just call it config for now, okay? But because we are pulling this data from a text file, what we're going to have to do is open our file of interest. Okay. And then we will run it. Okay, so I intentionally set this up this way. I wrote this exactly this way because doing the with open statement for this library does not work. You cannot do the with open statement. You have to do the standard open statement. The benefit of the with open statement is that you're kind of keeping all the different pieces on one line, and you don't have to call a .close method with the file. Whereas with the standard method you do, so we actually have to do the standard method. So the standard method is, let's say file equals open, we don't need this part right here. And then we have to declare the operation. Okay, so we're going to say config equals file.read. Okay, and now we switch this to config, and then we run, and as you can see here, we have an output. It's all parsed. Very nice, right? So now that we have it parsed, we can proceed to doing a loop over all the files within the directory. But before we do that, what I want to point something out here. We are not receiving a version on return for some reason. So the question is, why is that? And it's likely that the parser does not work with the show version output that we're using, which means that we're probably going to have to adjust the parser. So first we need to see what does the parser look like for show version, and why is it not working with that particular field specifically. Okay, so we're going to look at this and we're going to compare it. And compare it to our show version output. Okay, so question is, where does this start at? We're starting at software. Okay, so there's some blah 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 software. Okay, so that's what's happening here. Cisco iOS software. Okay, and then we have a white space of some kind, space tab, of the sorts. Okay, and then we have any character except white space for X number of times, and then we get to a literal end of parentheses, so we're talking about this right here. Okay, and then let's see what comes next. Then we have a white space. Okay, there's our white space. Version, white space. Okay, so now this is the version. All right, so the question is, what is this parsing out? So we have anything but white space. Okay, so this right here is going to be what's parsed. Okay. Now here is the reason right here why we're not getting a return. This early deployment and engineering Nova weekly build is throwing our parser off for some reason. So because that's the case, we're going to have to adjust the parser. However, it is saying, okay, white space number of times. Okay, actually, yeah, it's this right here. It's expecting a release afterwards. So I think that is our problem right there. So we need to adjust this accordingly. I could fix this really quickly, actually. I know exactly how I could adjust this. If we were to remove this and keep this, pretty sure we would get our version of interest. So, let's try that, okay? So the way we're going to do that is I have a virtual environment set up here. If we go into, we go into here and we go down to NTC templates. We go to the templates and we find our template of interest. Let us delete this for a moment. Okay. And let's see if that fixes it. And there you go. We have now effectively parsed out our version. Now, whether that works on the remainder of all these different, all these different other platforms, that's questionable. But I think that considering there are no going back to the template, if there are no other variables after following this, I think we should be okay overall, I think. So now that we have that, what we are now going to do after we close all these folders is we're going to come back to our parser and we're going to iterate through our files here. Okay, so we're going to say for, and actually there's another thing we need to put into here, import OS. I'm going to say for file in OS path actually no, it's os.list dir. That's what it was. For file in os.list dir, and then we're going to say file.open, and then we're just going to pass in file here. Okay. And then we are going to read inventory print. Okay, so let's make sure this works. Oh, right. And we actually also need to, let's do this. All right, let's say base path equals config. Okay, and then we're going to put this here, base path, and then we're going to concatenate this and this. Oh, let's make sure we include this. now we have our output, everything accounted for. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is we want to store this in CSV file. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is we want to import the CSV module. Okay. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to have a with open statement. Okay. And we'll just call this file output. Actually, we'll put it in the output folder. And we'll call it output.csv. Okay. It's going to be, you have to specify new line. Okay. Then we'll just call it CSV file. Right. And then before we dig into this, one of the things we want to declare in here is all of our various fields. Okay, so we have version as one of the fields. We have ROMMON, we have hostname, we have uptime, reload reason. Running image. Packages.conf. Is that accurate? Okay. I guess it is. All right. So let's go back here. Hardware is the next one. And then we have serial config register. You know, there's there is a lot of unnecessary fields here. A lot of unnecessary fields. We don't need all these. We don't need all these. So instead, this is what I'm going to do. All right. I know exactly how to do this. So let's delete config register. Let's keep hardware. We'll keep running image. I don't care about this. Actually, uptime could be useful. We'll keep uptime. Hostname, ROMMON. I'll keep ROMMON. So what we're going to say, whenever we look at our list with a dictionary inside of it, when we look at it, we're going to say for value, I'll just call it key, for key in inventory parsed 0.keys, if key not in field names del inventory parsed key, and that should remove our unnecessary field. Okay, good. So the next, what we want to do is we have to create the actual CSV object. Okay, writer, not reader. And then we also have to specify our CSV file. Okay, CSV file. And then another thing that we have to specify is the field names. Okay. Before we start digging into all the various entries that we're going to be looking at, we also have to write the header. And the header is going to have all these values put into it. Okay. And then finally, after all of the unnecessary keys are deleted, removed from our dictionary here, what we're going to do is we're going to say writer.writeRow, and then we're going to place our inventory parsed dictionary in there. Okay. So now we run that. And since this is a new file, probably want to specify that. So before I continue to run this, I just thought of something. This is actually a really good place to where we could use something like a dictionary comprehension. You guys have probably seen a list comprehension before, but you've probably never seen a dictionary comprehension. So we're going to do that. We're going to say mfixed equals key value for key value in inventory parse items if k in field names. Let's see if that works. And we don't even need this. We just recreate the whole thing. Oh, actually, we also want to clarify this is position 0. Okay. And there we go. There we go, there we go. Now, as you can see, we now have a nice little set of entries for our inventory. Now, mind you, these particular fields, I think it would honestly be best if you went about actually splitting these two different serial numbers into separate fields and then using those serial numbers as the unique identifier. But we're not going to cover that here. That gets into, you know, more a little more complex breakout of how you pull that apart. But honestly, it would probably be better that way, especially if you're trying to store this in a SQL database or something. It would make it a lot easier. So, and I just noticed that both of these host names are identical. They're supposed to be different, so we'll just make it different for now. Anyway, that's the whole video for today. So what did we do? We took a couple of show version commands. We parsed those out. We stored the inventory data, specific fields, into a CSV file. Now think about this. At scale, we could do a lot with this. Very nice, right? And the nice thing is, it's 16 lines of code. A whole 16 lines of code. Everything else is done by the library. Super good stuff. I'll talk to you later, guys. Hopefully you found this if you found this video useful, interesting, insightful, what I want you to do, like the video, share it, make a comment if you like, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.